It's time now for our fortnightly What's God Got to Do With It panel. This time we're talking about religion, fashion and faith. Gucci have been accused of cultural appropriation after designing turbans that were on sale for as much as $750. Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? A website also called Redbubble was criticised for selling miniskirts with religious imagery on them, including the Golden Temple. Now, we got in touch with Redbubble and they released this statement. Recently, we received feedback that some designs inspired by religious and culturally significant imagery were offensive to some people in the Sikh and Muslim communities when placed on miniskirts and leggings. We understand and respect the concerns raised. Most, though not all, of the images are within the bounds of our content guidelines. The way the uploading process worked, images were automatically enabled on a full array of products. This meant that many designs were added to miniskirts and leggings without the artist proactively assessing the appropriateness for that product. Redbubble has taken action to change this and removed related designs from these products out of respect for the community feedback we've received. So that's what Redbubble have said. Effectively, this is something that people can do themselves, but now we're going to be more on top of it, is what they've said. Meanwhile, Gucci, when talking about the $750 turbans, declined to comment, but this is what their spokesperson did. They shared two articles with one of our producers about why cultural appropriation isn't always a bad thing. What are your thoughts to that? 81869 or give me a message 07920 500 200. Got us to thinking about this question. Are religious symbols or images on clothing offensive? Let me know your thoughts. And to also discuss that, I'm joined by my panel, Aya Badawi, who's a project lead of Faiths Forum for London, philanthropist Sonal Sachdev Patel, and Sukh Singh Sodhi from Sikh PA as well. How are we all?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent. Good to have you all. I'm going to come to you first of all. Do you find it offensive? Do you think it is offensive to have religious imagery on clothing?
As a wider question, I would say yes. But if you were to look at the particulars of it and the specific examples, also context, I'm kind of on the fence on it, in the sense that obviously I have nothing against fashion. I mean, I'm not the best person to comment on that. But I think, fashion industries do need to be mindful. I mean, having an image of the Golden Temple or having the word Allah on a skirt, I would say is offensive. And just to touch base, for example, with the Sikh turban, I mean, again, it's about context. They didn't say that, this was, if they had, for example, not Gucci, anyone else, had a collection, I don't know, of, for example, I'm comparing it to the hijab. Maybe the hijab's a better example. There are collections of online retailers that sell hijabs, different colours, different designs, but they make it very clear that it's for the Muslim community. The issue with Gucci was that they didn't make it clear that they're depicting something that has existed for the Sikh community and is very sacred. So I would say it is cultural appropriation, definitely, and it is definitely offensive.
Sukh, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, definitely. All the examples you cited, I think, are offensive, and especially when you're talking about the Gucci and the style of the turban. They've said cultural appropriation isn't always a bad thing. Well, here it definitely is. But also, I think there's a broader point to be made about it being Gucci and the corporate power. And the way, you have a religious symbol, a really sacred item for a religious community that's basically being defined by a multinational fashion house, and Sikhs are saying, we don't want this. We don't want you to be defining this for us. We don't want you to be commercializing what is essentially a deep religious symbol.
Can I come back to what you were saying there about, the cultural appropriation being a bad thing? Why is it?
I think in this specific case, you have to understand that, especially with what Gucci have done, they've taken the material, the item, you could say, of a turban, and they've stripped it from everything that is Sikh about a turban. The long beard with it, the uncut hair, the fact that Sikhs routinely face discrimination, whether it's abuse, whether it's people being barred entry. Sikhs have died, and we're not talking like in ancient history or hundreds of years ago. Very recently, Sikhs have been on the end of fatal hate crimes because of discrimination around the turban. And, if you've got $800 to spend on a turban, I don't think you're going to be walking around the streets with that sort of abuse being shouted at you, you're probably going to be in a different area of society, probably in Mayfair. And this is Sikhs saying, we don't want you to take our symbol, take it to, these really sort of very high, very posh places. Gucci is an international high-end fashion brand. And we don't want you to do that to our religious item.
I'm playing devil's advocate here. Others might say, yes, I can see all that, but at the same time, at least they're raising awareness and, making this something that others will then start to understand about, and then they can learn more about turbans.
I think if you go back a few months when this was originally on the catwalk, for example, they had a non-Sikh modelling a turban, right? And it's about, we want the turban, we want what it looks like, but we don't want the Sikhi that comes with it. We don't want the Sikhness, you could say, that comes with it. We don't want the history of people having to give their lives for it. We don't want, the abuse that comes with it. We want to strip it from its culture and just take it. And then not even that, but we're going to make a huge profit on the end of it,
Yeah.
Like you can get a turban for less than 1% of the price of what Gucci is selling it for. This is blatant commercialisation.
Sonal, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it comes down to a lack of respect and understanding of what sits behind the turban. The turban is not worn as a fashion accessory. A Sikh man doesn't get up in the morning and think, shall I wear a baseball cap or shall I wear a turban? It isn't a fashion accessory. It's a symbol of their faith. And I think it poses a much wider question in society about the fact that there is a lack of understanding and education about one another's religions. And if we understand that, then we're able to know where we draw the line. So as a Hindu, I see images of Ganesh and Shiva and Lakshmi all over the place. And most of the time, they don't offend me. It doesn't offend me to see Ganesh on a T-shirt, for example. In fact, they sell them at the local temple. My daughter has one. She loves to wear it. But I also have seen Ganesh on bathroom mats and toilet mats. Now, to me, that is offensive. And the reason that that's offensive to me is because the person who's produced that sees that Ganesh as art, almost like an Indian Disney character. They don't have the understanding behind what does that deity represent within Hinduism. So I'm not Muslim, I'm not Sikh, but I know straight away that wearing a turban from Gucci is disrespectful to the Sikh faith, because I know a little bit about why the Sikhs wear the turbans. And I think that really is the point here, is that we have to start educating each other on our own religions. And that's why this debate is really good, because that's how we learn, when we speak to people from those traditions.
Yes, you're right to say, particularly with Hindu gods, deities, or even the Om symbol, I've seen that on, I'm not going to say the shops, but particularly in the noughties when like leather band necklaces were very popular for men, and you just see the Om symbol all over the place for that. Was that for you offensive? Or was that appropriation? Or was that just a different time?
So Hinduism, I think, is because it's such a pluralistic religion, we don't have a very strict, this is okay and this is not okay. We have so many different paths within Hinduism. So for me, honestly, it doesn't offend me. I look at it and it makes me smile. I see the Om symbol, it reminds me of my religion, and that makes me happy. But if someone's wearing it around their neck, they may not understand it, but they're not doing it in a disrespectful way. If they put Om on their floor tiles and they stand on it, I think that's unacceptable.
So what is the difference with that then, and say the skirts that would have some Arabic writing or something on them? What's the difference there?
It's about, I think, again, it's very subtle, and that's why the understanding is so important. It's that you're putting it on basically your bottom. You're putting it on your your naked body. That doesn't feel respectful. It's the same as I wouldn't go into a temple in hot pants. But I'd go to the beach in hot pants. And it's not that God isn't everywhere. I believe God is just as much at the beach as at the temple. But out of respect, I wouldn't go like that.
I think there's a broader problem here, especially the Gucci response to you about sharing articles why cultural appropriation is okay. We have to understand that different cultures have different ways of showing respect. If you see like in New Zealand a Maori greeting when people put their noses together, obviously that's not something that we do, that I'm very used to, but I see a culture doing that. I don't do it myself, but I understand that's their way of showing respect, and I'm respectful of that. And it's about saying, okay, if people in a certain community are saying this is our culture, and on the whole we feel like this is disrespectful, I don't think it's a place of a corporate entity that's looking to make a profit out of it to be like, actually, well, we're going to share some articles about how it might not be
I agree with that point. I think it's problematic. I think it's good when other cultures defend and speak about other cultures, but I think it's problematic when others speak for different cultures and different faiths. And I think in that instant, that's what Gucci is saying. It's almost like, shutting down the Sikh community. No, we get your point, but it's not good. We're right. And I see this a lot, for example, with examples of the hijab, when there was this whole debate around the burqa, and, everybody that was commenting were like white middle-class men. Nobody thought to call actually a woman who calls the burqa. I think just one channel done that. So I think that's my opinion on that. So I think there's almost like a shutdown and not listening to communities.
Definitely.
So I agree with all the points made. And it is about that. It's exactly what you said about, if they had said it, it's all about context for me. Bringing somebody who doesn't represent Asian culture, doesn't represent the Sikh community wearing a turban is very offensive. And, we see it in the fashion industry with the hijab as well. Like you, I don't get so offended. It's a bit different with the headscarf because, head coverings don't just exist in the Muslim community. It's not a new thing. So it doesn't offend me per se, but I think it can be problematic, for example, when it's, there are controversies of Muslim women or the hijab being depicted in different contexts.
Yeah, or being sexualised in a way.
Exactly, that's the right thing, yeah.
What's more annoying or what galls you more? So I'll come to you first on this, because you've mentioned it twice actually already. The fact that companies are profiting upon your history, culture, tradition and values, or the fact that they're appropriating culture and not giving people any more information about it other than just taking it for what it is?
I mean, both are quite bad, but if an individual does something, then I can connect with them on an individual level and I can try and educate them on an individual level. Gucci has revenues of like literally billions and billions of dollars, and the Sikh community is a relatively small community. And what you've seen is a large-scale mobilisation of our community, not just as people who are outraged by this, but also as consumers, as people that Gucci will recognise. And I think it's problematic that Gucci, if they will see us at all, I'm afraid will probably see us as just a large bunch of consumers that are angry with the product rather than as Sikhs whose heritage or whose culture has been attacked.
Interesting. What about for yourselves? Is it about the profit or is it about the fact that your culture is being appropriated?
I mean, for me, I think the turban is different from other things because of what it represents. Yes. Because it's a symbol of faith, it's a symbol of equality. And again, to sell it for £790 or whatever it was, I mean, really sort of takes away from that. But I think their point about cultural appropriation is a really interesting one because this is cultural appropriation with a total lack of understanding of the history, the representation. Some people might think there's an element of cultural appropriation, which is where you're learning about one another's cultures, but it comes from a very different place. And like Sukh says, it's, there's the commercialisation of it. To me, it's just...
Is that the line when you go past that line, when you start profiting off it, that's when, you've gone too far?
No, even if you don't profit off it, even if they've been selling it for whatever it costs for a piece of cloth to tie, the point is that they are making out like it's a fashion accessory, and it isn't.
And it's not just the money here, but it's about Gucci as an international, world-recognised trendsetter. If they could decide that their turban, in air quotes I'm going to put it, isn't fashionable next year, so what they're going to do with it then? Yeah. It's up to them to really, we don't want to, the Sikh community doesn't want to be defined by that. They don't want to be bought into this.
No, go ahead.
I don't think Gucci have a good reputation at the moment. I mean, only a few months ago they had the blackface jumper.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not new.
Well, see, this is the thing.
It's not new.
This is my question. We can't question their motives as a one company, but there are so many incidents of this happening now. The cynic in me, and we've mentioned two companies here, the cynic in me thinks people are just doing this so that they get more attention.
Yeah. It's to get something, to get people talking.
Yeah.
And just to go back to answer your question, I think both as well. I think, for example, when there are, hijabi models or Muslim women in fashion industries, and it's like 1 out of 100, I think it's good. But I don't think, I should be like, oh, wow, I'm so impressed by this because, don't forget that this is a commercial entity and they're not bringing...
don't get so swept away in it all.
They're not bringing a woman who wears a headscarf because, out of tolerance and, they're doing it for themselves and for their own pockets. Yeah.
Do you think that we as a society have to hold big institutions and the media accountable for what they say and what they do and how that feeds into society's perceptions about other religions? Because some people may have never met a Sikh in their life or never met a Muslim. I live in a very Jewish area and I know many of my friends are Jewish. I know so many people that don't know anything about Judaism because they've never met a Jewish person. And so we have to push organisations like Gucci to take responsibility because they do wield a great power.
But will they, though? Will they do that? That's the other question, isn't it?
If kind of consumers put pressure on them, at the end of the day, they're motivated by money. They're not motivated by morality. And so we have to pressure them in a way that, in a way that they understand.
Let's welcome Harry to the programme, who's got in touch from Birmingham. Harry, welcome. What are your thoughts on this?
Simple, really. I don't think there's nothing wrong with it. But the only objection I'd say is there's nothing wrong as long as the people from that particular religion are represented by that fashion brand. For example, the example I gave you, if you had a white guy wearing a turban, Sikh turban, for example, that particular fashion company should have Sikh models who regularly wear turbans, and that would go for any other religious kind of clothing. As long as those people from that religion are represented, then in that context there's nothing wrong with it. It's just no different to me wearing, I don't know, a T-shirt with a Sikh symbol on it, or one of my tattoos that are Sikh symbols. Now, what matters is people falsely judging. When people falsely judge what you're doing, that's when it's different. As long as you can explain to them the context behind why, for example, you've got a religious tattoo, or why you're wearing a T-shirt with a certain symbol on it, and there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is people's false judgment. And unfortunately, we live in a judgmental society. And but the point that we just made, Gucci, they're only interested in money. So if you can show them by having models from that particular religious group, it's going to give them publicity either way. So, and that's what they want. Publicity will bring them more money. And that's just a simple thing. You shouldn't be offended.
So what are your thoughts?
What it comes down to.
Thank you, Harry. Would you have been happy if some of the models that were used were Sikh as well by themselves?
I mean, it depends. Are they modelling a turban that's then going to be on a shelf in Mayfair that anybody can buy and wear whenever they want?
Yeah,
I think that's the difference, right? I'm always pushing for Sikhs to be represented everywhere. What I'm not for is the product itself, if you like, and the way
overburdening or overpowering actual Sikhism. It's just this turban becomes an isolated thing.
That and stripping it of it's a form of cultural erasure.
Okay, thank you very much. Got a text here. Feel free to pick this. I think we've covered it already, but just let's cover it again. This text says, how can you use a religious symbol or religious piece of clothing for financial gain? Answer the question, anybody? Sukh?
If you're selling it to the people, if you're selling it to the people from that culture and from that faith and that background, that's not problematic. I don't see that there's anything wrong with it. And it's not saying that nobody can't use that. For example, the hijab, there's no one saying that you can't use that, I don't know, as a neck scarf, not anything like that. But the issue is, just to go back to the caller, is the matter of the fact is that they did not have Sikh models. It's Gucci. And as you said, this isn't going to go to a local shop. It's going to Mayfair. People who could actually afford Gucci. I mean, £800.
I think we're getting confused though. One thing is that just because you live in Mayfair doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. There are going to be Sikhs that live in Mayfair that tie their own turbans. So that maybe is not the distinction. The distinction is, I think, all about respect. It's about if you don't need guidelines if you have understanding and you have respect, because then you will self-police and you will know what is and isn't appropriate most of the time.
Let's talk about a couple of issues that Harry raised there. First, about offence. Are we too quick to take offence these days, or is it the fact that we're more willing to stand up for ourselves? What's the line?
I don't think it's, in my head and my mind and my logic, I don't think it's that difficult to respect people.
It's really not.
It's really not. It's just people's beliefs. It's understanding. It's listening to that other person. For me personally, that comes quite naturally. Maybe for others it doesn't. But something like this, where Gucci is shutting down the community, that's saying it is this, and they're saying no, it's not. That is offensive because you're speaking on behalf of someone.
Yeah, and I think also it's about being the voice for your culture. So we were talking earlier before the show about how it's great that the Sikh community have a voice that officially channels their beliefs. So if they don't stand up, then how, not just Gucci, but how is everybody else going to know? And actually, normally I'm very critical of the media, but in this case, a lot of the American outlets like CNN and the Washington Post did a really good coverage as to why are Sikhs offended? What is it? Where does the turban come from? What is the history behind it? And this is what the Sikh community is saying. So there has been, in a way, a positive message from all of this, which is that it's educated people. There were some things I learned that I didn't know just by reading some of those articles. So,
Sukh, do you agree with that?
I mean, I always say, just come ask us. We're here.
Exactly, yeah.
You can see us pretty easily. Like, just come ask us. I work alongside an organisation which is a Sikh educational organisation, and they do probably maybe one school visit a week, just because Sikh kids in schools get bullied for their turban or for their long hair, and then the head teacher calls the organisation in and say, can you give an assembly to people? We definitely need education. It's something that the Sikh community are doing. I think at the same time, we need people to have open ears. We need people to listen to us as well. It goes back to my point earlier. If we're saying this is disrespectful in our culture, if you reply, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, well, that's fine. That might be your culture, but you have to respect that different people have different ideas of respect, and that's different cultures. I think the point you asked earlier about are we getting too offensive, I think people who say this are used to their way of respect, their culture being the norm, and being like, actually, we live in a pluralistic society. We live with different cultures who have sort of different belief systems and different ideas of offence. And we're just letting you know what ours is.
Interesting. We're nearly out of time. We've got 45 seconds or so. But I would like you all very quickly to answer Gucci's question, really, in terms of cultural appropriation isn't always a bad thing. Very simple. Yes or no, is it? Can you see where they're coming from?
Yeah, I think it can't. I'm putting on clothes in the morning. That's cultural appropriation. So, but there's a fine line. But yeah, I can imagine a place where it's not always a bad thing.
Sukh?
I would draw the distinction between appropriation and cultural appreciation in certain contexts. I think labelling them different things can be helpful when making these sorts of judgments.
Thank you very much. Aya, anything on this?
I'm on the fence as well, and I think it's all about context. So the examples that we've given is offensive and it is cultural appropriation.
Thank you very much for your time, as always. Sonal Sachdev Patel, Aya Badawi, and also Sukh Singh Sodhi.